December 20th, 1943, late morning over northwestern Germany. A lid of winter cloud sits low and colorless, turning the world beneath into a smeared map of rivers and fields. At 27,000 feet the air is so cold it feels metallic, a dead pressure that stiffens fingers inside gloves, and makes breath a shallow labor behind oxygen masks. Far below, the port city of Bremen is hidden by haze and smoke. Above it, the sky is crowded with contrails and black bursts of flak that bloom like poisonous flowers, each one timed by men on the ground who cannot see faces, only altitude and speed. In the middle of this violence, a single B-17F flying fortress begins to fall behind the formation, its aluminum skin already torn open, its plexiglass nose shattered, and its engines coughing unevenly. On its flank, painted like a small, stubborn joke against the machinery of war, is the name, the Olde Pub. What happens next will be remembered, not because it altered the strategic balance of the air war, nor because it changed the outcome of any campaign, but because it revealed, briefly and dangerously, how fragile ideology can become when it meets a human face at point-blank range. It will take decades for the full outline of that moment to emerge, because both sides will be ordered into silence, the Americans for fear that mercy might soften crews who must keep firing, the Germans for fear that mercy itself has become a capital crime. Yet in that silence, the story will live, passed like a contraband cigarette between veterans, written down in fragments, resurfacing through newsletters and reunions, until two old men finally confirm to one another that, on one winter day, honor briefly outran obedience. By December 1943, the daylight bombing campaign over Europe has become a grinding contest of industry and endurance. The 8th Air Force sends hundreds of heavy bombers from England toward German factories and ports, betting that precision bombing can fracture the Reich's capacity to fight. Germany answers with a layered defense, radar, massed anti-aircraft guns, and fighter interceptors, B, F-1, 0-9s and F-W-1-90s, often arriving in swarms to tear at any bomber that drifts away from the protective geometry of the formation. For American crews, survival depends on staying locked into that box of mutual gunfire. For German pilots, success depends on breaking it apart. A straggler is not merely vulnerable, it is a reward. That day's operation is V.I. Bomber Command Mission 1-59. Hundreds of heavy bombers, B-17s and B-24s, are dispatched against Bremen, a vital port and industrial target on the River Weser. Records describe the raid's intensity, heavy and accurate flak, fighter attacks, aircraft lost and damaged, and crews killed, wounded, or captured. The scale matters because it explains the mental climate in which decisions are made. In a sky where hundreds of men can die without ever seeing their killer, compassion is not only rare, it is tactically irrational. The Olde Pub belongs to the 527th Bombardment Squadron of the 379th Bombardment Group. It is commanded by a 21-year-old aircraft commander, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, flying his very first combat mission. The bomber is part of a formation so large it feels impersonal, like a moving city of metal. Inside, it is intimate, 10 men pressed into narrow stations, each dependent on machinery and on one another. The expectation, on both sides, has been built by training, propaganda, and repetition. For American airmen, the B-17 is marketed as a fortress, rugged, bristling with guns, able to absorb punishment and keep flying. For German fighter pilots, the bomber stream is a kind of mechanical quarry: kill enough, survive long enough, and medals follow. Franz Stigler has strong incentives that day. He has already downed bombers and is close to earning a coveted decoration. War creates its own economy of prestige, and it is paid in burning aircraft. But what men expect in war rarely matches what they experience. Over Bremen, the fortress proves mortal. On the bomb run, flak strikes shatter the plexiglass nose. The number 2 engine is knocked out. Number 4 is damaged and must be throttled back. Controls are compromised. Coming off target, Brown cannot keep station. the bomber slips out of the formation's protective envelope and becomes a lone, limping object against a hostile sky. Then comes the punishment reserved for stragglers. German fighters attack in repeated passes for more than 10 minutes. A third engine is hit and produces only partial power. Oxygen, hydraulics, electrical systems, damaged. The defensive guns freeze or fall silent in the extreme cold until only the top turret guns and a forward-firing nose gun remain useful. The tail gunner is killed. Most of the crew in the rear is incapacitated by wounds or exposure to the open, frigid air. Brown himself is hit by a fragment in the shoulder. And yet the aircraft remains in the air, not because it is invincible, but because men inside it refuse to accept the arithmetic of gravity. Brown's response is primal. He turns into the attackers again and again, trying to disrupt their aim and bring his few working guns to bear. At some point oxygen deprivation begins to blur time. The last clear memory is disorienting, the B-17 rolling inverted during a steep maneuver, the ground appearing up through the cockpit windows. When consciousness returns, the aircraft is level at roughly 1,000 feet above the earth, low enough that trees and rooftops are no longer abstractions. This is where the story narrows into a corridor of fate. The bomber is flying low over Germany, wounded and slow, dragging its injuries toward the coast. It passes near an airfield at Oldenburg, where a German fighter pilot, Franz Stigler, is on the ground refueling and rearming his Messerschmitt. He sees the crippled B-17 and takes off to intercept. In Luftwaffe logic, this should be a straightforward end: one more bomber destroyed, one more victory tallied. What Stigler expects when he closes in is a fighting machine, guns tracking, turrets turning, a bomber crew still capable of killing him with a single accurate burst. But when he draws alongside, he does not see a fortress. He sees a ruin that happens to be flying. It is the most heavily damaged aircraft he has ever seen that is still in the air. He can see into the fuselage. He can see wounded men. He can see that the tail gunner is dead. And in that moment, the target stops being an icon of the enemy and becomes something else, a collection of human bodies, half alive, trying to get home. Here, ideology falters on the edge of a trigger. Stigler has been shaped by a culture that still carries remnants of an older chivalric ideal. He remembers the rule given to him: if I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you down myself. You fight by the rules to keep our humanity. Such a code does not erase the brutality of war, but it does create a boundary. Certain acts are not victories, only killings. Now the moral geometry becomes unbearable. Stigler can destroy the B-17. The outcome is almost guaranteed: a short burst into the engines or cockpit, the bomber rolling into the ground, 10 Americans dying in fire. Yet he looks at the wrecked machine and thinks that he cannot kill these half-dead people. He compares it to shooting at men in parachutes, an act his own superiors have framed as shameful. In a sky where killing is routine, he suddenly finds one kind of killing intolerable. The stakes of restraint are not sentimental. In Nazi Germany, refusal to finish off an enemy aircraft could mean court-martial, and potentially execution. Stigler knows this. He also knows something else: that flak batteries ahead could still shred the stricken bomber as it approaches the coast. If he simply turns away, ground gunners may finish the job. If he stays close, flying in formation, his presence might discourage German anti-aircraft crews from firing, because no gunner wants to risk hitting a friendly fighter. Mercy, in this case, requires not only withholding fire but actively shielding the enemy with one's own aircraft. Stigler moves alongside the bomber and gestures. He tries to direct Brown to land in Germany, where the wounded could receive medical attention and the crew could surrender. Brown refuses. He has no reason to trust a German fighter hovering at wingtip distance. Stigler signals again, toward neutral Sweden, another possible refuge. Brown either cannot understand or cannot risk believing. The bomber continues toward the gray line where land ends and the North Sea begins. In that stretch of flight, minutes that feel like an hour, there is a sound that serves as the story's recurring symbol, the steady, uneven hammer of the B-17's surviving engines. It is not heroic music. It is labor. It is the sound of American industrial abundance reduced to its barest function, one machine, barely functioning, hauling 10 lives across enemy territory. The engine beat becomes a kind of democratic metronome, indifferent to rank, creed, or flag, keeping time for whoever is still alive to hear it. For Brown and his crew, the engine sound is also a promise they do not fully believe. The war has taught them that survival is statistical, not moral. They have seen bombers vanish in fireballs, crews swallowed by cloud and smoke. They know the Luftwaffe's job is to kill them. So when a German fighter does not fire, the absence of gunfire feels uncanny, like a silence in a place where silence does not belong. The bomber remains low, damaged, and exposed, and yet it continues. For Stigler, the engine beat becomes something else, an audible reminder that the enemy is trying to live. In most interceptions, his target is distant, faceless, reduced to silhouette and doctrine. Here, he is close enough to read the aircraft's wounds like a medical chart, missing control surfaces, torn fuselage, dead positions. The B-17 is catastrophically damaged, and its crew is visibly suffering. Stigler's choice is made in that proximity. At the coastline, the decision completes itself. Stigler escorts the bomber out over the North Sea. Once it is clear the Americans are committed to open water, he gives a salute, rolls away, and disappears back toward Germany. He does not follow to the edge of range, he does not linger where another German pilot might see and report him. He does what he believes he can do, just enough, and then breaks contact, returning to a system that would not forgive the thing he has done. Now the North Sea becomes the final judge. Rough water below, winter weather, long distance, about 250 miles of storm-tossed expanse. Olde Pub makes it across and lands at RAF Seething. The crew is debriefed. The encounter is noted. And then the strangest administrative detail arrives: the debriefing is classified secret, and the men are ordered not to discuss what happened. On the German side, Stigler likewise says nothing to his superiors. Two silences, one enforced by discipline, the other by fear, lock the incident away. Time passes the way it always does after survival, abruptly, and then all at once. Brown completes his tour, continues his life, carries the image of the escorting fighter in his mind. Stigler survives his own war, eventually emigrates to Canada. The ideology that claimed total control over conscience collapses, but the private calculus of that winter day remains. In 1986, Brown begins searching for the unknown pilot. In 1990, a response arrives. Franz Stigler, living in Canada, answers through the network of fighter pilot newsletters. They compare time, place, markings, enough to confirm what had once seemed impossible. In June 1990, they meet again for the first time since the war. Enemies become friends, not in abstraction, but through the hard confirmation that each had been real to the other at the edge of death. This is the transformation at the heart of the event, not the transformation of one man into a saint, but the transformation of perception. Stigler's war had offered him a simple story: enemy equals target. Brown's war had offered him another: enemy equals killer. The encounter fractures both. Stigler discovers that obedience can be immoral even when it is legal, and that a victory can become a lifelong wait. Brown discovers that the enemy's cockpit can contain restraint, that the human capacity for mercy can survive even inside a regime built on fear and punishment. The change is not ideological conversion, it is something more precise and more dangerous: a refusal to let propaganda fully own the meaning of another human life. Evidence of that transformation survives not only in later interviews but in the cold structure of records, the mission details, the aircraft serial number, the unit assignments, the description of damage and casualties, the landing location, and the subsequent secrecy. Archival records anchor the aircraft in a chain of dates: delivery, assignment, transfer, damage over Bremen, and the fact it never flew in action again after its ordeal. War is often remembered as drama, archives remember it as paperwork. In this story, the paperwork matters because it proves the drama had a place to happen. And yet, facts alone cannot capture what the engine beat meant inside that battered bomber. The sound would have been everywhere, vibrating through metal frames, in the teeth, in the ribs. The men would have been listening not for beauty but for failure, for a cough, a drop in pitch, the sudden catastrophic silence that means the sea is no longer below them as a landscape but as a grave. The engine beat, in that moment, becomes a symbol of American abundance stripped down to survival, a nation able to build such a machine, send it across an ocean, and still have enough machines left to fill the sky, yet on this day, it all comes down to whether one damaged aircraft can keep its rhythm for a few more hours. Stigler's own cockpit has its sounds too: engine, airflow, the faint mechanical tremor of a fighter built for decisive violence. But he chooses silence where noise is expected. He does not add his gunfire to the chaos. Instead, he adds only presence, his aircraft as a moving warning to flak crews, his wings as a kind of reluctant shield. In a war defined by mass, his act is small enough to vanish, yet large enough to risk his life if discovered. Brown and Stigler remained friends until the end of their lives, both dying in 2008 within months of each other. The world they inhabited in 1943 tried to teach them that ideology is everything and individual conscience is nothing. Yet the sky over Bremen taught a different lesson, that a single decision, made without witnesses, can outlast governments and uniforms. In the end, the story returns to that winter sound, the uneven, stubborn beat of engines over the North Sea. It is the sound of a machine refusing to stop, and of men refusing to surrender to the role assigned to them by distant leaders. It is also the sound of a paradox, that freedom and abundance are not only measured in what a nation can build, but in what a person can refuse to do with the power they have been given. War demanded that Stigler fire, his conscience demanded that he see. War demanded that Brown fear, survival demanded that he endure. Between those demands, a narrow corridor opened, just wide enough for a ruined bomber to pass, and for two enemies to carry the weight of that passage for the rest of their lives.